Bye. Welcome to Speak Sex. I'm your host, Eve Eurydice, and today's guest is Kendra Cunov. She joins us from San Francisco. She is a life coach who practices circling and authentic living, and also the Beyond Boundaries practice. So, welcome to the show, Kendra.
Thank you. Thank you.
My understanding of the No Man Diet is basically a program that, you know, you've put together for women who feel despair or some sort of like existential loss of value without a life partner. And my understanding of Beyond Boundaries is that a methodology to be able to integrate over and through the boundaries that our culture sets up to keep us separate and apart when we're actually so interconnected with each other and with nature and the cycles of nature. So that's my understanding. But of course, I would like to hear from you about your work. I do want to say that you were born in the Zen Center in San Francisco, which is pretty unique, and spent the first, I think, 7 years of your life there. So, yes.
Well, I was actually born in the San Francisco Zen Center, but I moved with my mother when I was 6 months old to the sister community, which is actually the monastery, which is in the middle of the Ventana wilderness. So it took me a long time to really realize. People would ask, like, what was it like to be raised in a Buddhist community? And I realized that I actually think, you named this piece of connection with nature. That actually probably at least as big of an impact was that I was raised in wilderness. We had no electricity. Certainly it's this beautiful community, but you have to travel an hour over a dirt road to come to where the community is. And there's a river. I grew up with it being dark at night and light in the daytime, and kerosene lamps and no technology. And and I lived that way even when we left the monastery until I was 11.
Wow.
So,
well, I'm going to interject for a second. It's because we don't know. We just meet for the first time.
Yeah.
And I was born on the island of Lesbos in Greece, and it was a similar situation when I was super young. So, like, my first memories of my mom are like, washing clothes in the rain outside, hand washing, right, and trying to like find a place to like hang them, under cover, and hearing from my grandmothers and my great grandmother about what herbs, are good for what ailment, or if the crops were not doing well, like you say, this blessing, and when I ran away from home when I was 15 because I just wanted to get away from my dad and patriarchy and the role for women that was extremely limited there. As I hit puberty, right, my options like dramatically shrunk. And I thought, I'm going to go to the most different, like opposite place I can think of. And I flew into LA, which to me was like the ultimate, I guess, industrial progress, Hollywood, right? Freedom. And there you are. And we seem to be similar age. And you had a very similar upbringing right there in California, not far. And I had no idea, which just goes to show how, interconnected we are after all, right?
Yeah.
I would never have thought that lifestyle was happening in California.
I think I just had a conversation actually with some friends of mine about how many people have the story that they grew up not belonging or that they didn't fit in. But then when we talk to the people around them, all the people around them also thought they don't belong and they don't fit in. And so but like I might think, like I grew up in this way, right? But the kids I went to school with had a lot of money. I grew up in a very wealthy area. And so I thought, I don't fit in. I am different from them. But the more that I have these conversations, the more I realize like those girls also thought they didn't belong and they didn't fit in. And so I think that idea that we're, again, kind of like we're separate or we're the only ones having this experience is not as accurate as we think it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good message.
Mm-hmm.
And it does speak to the fact that therefore the culture is not made to, to naturally, like, accept us as we are. So our discomfort must be with, the way that our cultural reality defines us, so that in our own way, we all feel like we're outside and we have to make, some sort of like, compromise and change to pass, right? To kind of like,
mm-hmm.
Appear assimilated.
Mm-hmm. But then again, it's this question becomes assimilated to what, right? Because
right,
it's not actually the other people. And I think there's some truth to what you're saying around the culture. As adults, as children, it's more challenging. But as adults, I think there is also this piece where we can wake up and say, oh, I get to make the rules for me. And, you mentioned the authentic relating piece. And when I was teaching more pure authentic relating, I would end up in rooms of people where the most common thing that people said was, oh, but you gave us permission. We would lead some format and and then at the end, it was almost an accusation. Sometimes they'd say, oh, but you gave us permission. And I thought, oh, but if everybody's saying that, what if we're all just walking around waiting for someone else to give us permission?
Mm-hmm.
And what is it actually to become the permission giver? And not just for myself, right? Like I get to say for me, and we make it again very self-oriented. But what if I become like walking permission for other people? What if the person next to me or like my coworker, right? We all think like, oh, well, I'm so weird and, my coworkers wouldn't accept me or they don't want to talk about this, that, or the other. And what if I actually just said, I'd be so interested to talk about whatever, what is your earliest experience of death? Right. And what if I say that and maybe the person gives me a funny look and walks away and doesn't want to have that conversation, but maybe I just gave them permission to have a real conversation that they've also been dying to have. And so what is it that we need to do in our lives so that we feel resourced enough to take a risk and be the permission giver that says like, oh, we're going to talk about feelings here, or we're going to talk about how beautiful the flowers are, or we're going to talk about death, or we're going to talk about sex, or we're going to talk, like, hey, that's what happens around me. Like we have, and we don't have to say it's weird, right? We can just say like, oh, that's what happens around me.
Yeah. Well, so I think what you're saying is, what if we all were each other's permission givers?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. and sort of stop waiting, like, oh, I hope this person does something that makes me think I have permission to be myself.
Right.
What if I be the one that bees myself so fully that the people around me go, oh, we have permission to do that here? Mm-hmm. Actually, oh, we get to be who we are? Oh, like what a gift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's like embodiment or conscious embodiment or,
I think of embodiment. I think embodiment, yes, it's actually what we do with our bodies, like, yes, but it's also what we don't just conceptually understand, but what we can live.
Right. That's what
like,
I
what
mean.
can we, yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you know, it's not new, but it just somehow slips our attention as we focus on, you know, the hierarchy, again, you know, the cultural hierarchy, you know, in the world of like money and status and whatnot. But I mean, you know, the ancient gods and the, you know, did punished humans for hubris and for, you know, taking on the role of gods with each other, basically. And, you know, Christ was like, you know, whosoever, you know, feels that, you know, he can pick up the first stone because he's sin free, you know, or she, right? So, but somehow we fall into this trap of like, you know, blaming sinners, fellow sinners, let's say, for sinning differently. And I'm using Christian language here, you know, so the word sin is not really, you know, our word in the 21st century, but it could be any fault or, you know, flaw or trespass or misnaming or disrespect, right? That we might notice in the other. Yeah.
Well, and I think what you say is interesting, right? That sin differently. Because when there is that permission, I think then it becomes, like, I mean, I think mostly that comes like to judge others for sinning differently. It just comes from a discomfort with my own self. Fundamentally, right? If I'm like, oh, whatever I think is weird about me, if I'm actually not defensive about it, like I get to be this weird, you know, but if I'm actually right with myself, just like, oh, this is the being I am is really normal in these ways and really weird in these ways and really mundane in these ways and really esoteric in these, like, this is just the being that I am. The more that other people being the beings that they are, it doesn't do much to me. You know, I mean, it's interesting, but it's not offensive.
Right. It's not a comparative study, right? Or, yeah. Or a contest.
Which, I mean, it's interesting.
Like
this
the
isn't really
Bachelorette contest.
Well, yeah, because this isn't really it's not exactly what the No Man Diet is about, but you brought that up at the beginning, and I was just having a call with some of the women who are on my team for the No Man Diet today. And one of the things that came through actually was that I was saying, oh, the reason they're on the team is because they're unique. They were sort of asking the question like, oh, was that too much me? Like not enough No Man Diet, whatever, you know, quote unquote, was that not? And I said, oh, but that's why I hired you, because there's the content of the No Man Diet, but then I'm just me. And then each of these women is themselves. And then there's the whole community of women going through the actual program. And what we really see is that there's infinite ways to be a woman, you know, and there's infinite desires that we have. And there's infinite, like subtle differences in the way we want relationship. And there's these similarities where we go, oh my gosh, we're so much the same. But then right next to them are the ways we're different, but we go, oh my God, you're so amazing like that. Like I'm not like that, but I love that about you. And I want that model. I mean, I want that modeled for the world, but I absolutely want that modeled for the women in the No Man Diet. It's like, hey, you're not here to become more like me. You know, you're here to become more like you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, I'd love to hear more about it. To me, it sounds like a kind of like a divorce, you know, from the narrative that we've been fed. So, you know, a symbolic divorce, almost like an intellectual or an intellected, you know, divorce from that modeling that, you know, we were formed by when we were really young and impressionable. and the expectations we may each have, and as you say, they may be very different, of a happy life as a couple, right?
Well, I mean, I think what you're saying is really true at the deepest sense, that, and not even really intellectual. I mean, I would say part of the reason that I run the No Man Diet as a whole program is because the process actually is so much deeper than just don't be with a partner, don't be dating or be with a man or seeking a partner for 12 weeks. It's like, it's all the processes that happen. And so it really becomes, like you were saying, an embodied process. Not just an idea that I don't need a man, but I suddenly feel in a place I know in some place that I never knew before that I don't. But I also think that it's, honestly, I think at least women in the United States, or sort of quote unquote Western world, we're fed two simultaneous narratives.
Right. Yes.
And one is you need a man, and the other is you don't need a man.
Beautiful. Yes. And
they both, I hope can I swear?
Yeah. Yes.
Either one of those on its own already fucks us. But put together, we're just fucked. We can't win. We're like, wait, I'm not allowed to need a man, and I need a man, and I don't want either, and I don't I'm just trapped. And so the No Man Diet, actually, we step out of it. We're not ping-ponging between I need a man, I don't need a man, I need a man, I don't need a man. We just step out completely. And I think in that space, again, it's like, we find who's this human being that's Kendra? Who is just this miraculous human being? And then, we can choose to have relationships or not have relationships, but it's different. It's a different ballgame.
And what do you find, or what do the women who practice this, which is a long time, the cleanse, 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if they want,
I'll just interject for a moment because, they can definitely repeat it. But I often, so much of the time, the women say, this should be 6 months. Mm-hmm. And which is my own No Man Diet was 6 months. Mm-hmm. And they somewhere in the middle of the No Man Diet program, they're like, oh my God, Kendra, this should be 6 months. And I'm like, I know, but you would not have signed, 12 weeks sounded like death. When you were signing up, you thought you were going to die. And so we say 12 weeks because it's like a little death. And then many of the women actually, they take the invitation, not to do the program again necessarily, but there's a whole process at the completion in which they can extend their own process if they wish to do so. There's a whole process for completing, or there's a process to extend if that's their wish.
And you meet the first 12 weeks, the group meets how often?
There's a new teaching every week. And then there's a virtual community, to engage in ongoingly. And then I hold these live calls throughout that time to work with the group and to answer questions. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And also, they also have access to each other, to support each other if they feel.
Oh yeah, which is essential. So, I've been leading the No Man Diet for 6 years now, I think. And every year there's always women who say it's not running right now, but can't I just go through the program on my own? I just want the content. I'll pay you, I just want to and I say, every time I say no, because what I see every time I run it is that actually the community is essential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For holding each other accountable.
It's accountable.
Way. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm not alone.
Right. Yeah. It's like,
so sometimes it's accountable.
Right.
Oh my God, I want to text my ex. Will somebody talk me out of it? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just like, my heart is hurting and I feel lost and I'm scared. And then there's other women who say, oh my God, I feel just like that today too. And suddenly their heart hurts a little bit less because they don't think they're the only one.
Mm-hmm. Or like they slipped in kissed somebody or whatever, yeah, yeah. It's a little, it seems based, it's kind of like in the outer bounds of AA or, SAA or SLAA, kind of like a similar process, even though one could not call this addiction because it's how we're supposed to be. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I would say, again, like finding that place of commonality, right? I think we can feel, I do talk about it like the addictive hit, right? There's actually this sensation, right, that often comes from external, like, oh my God, they looked at me. Oh, I thank God, I exist.
Yeah,
like now I can make it through the rest of the day.
Yeah. There's like so many, I'm sure, so many neurochemical effects, right, that come from.
And the truth is, we do need each other. But how can we be in connection without running these habit patterns? And I have never personally I don't know what the sex and love addicts are not like, I don't know what their content is. So I don't, I can't speak to it personally, but one of the things that I teach that I think is very different from sort of other pieces is really the essential practice of pleasure, to stay engaged in relationship with ourselves and in relationship with pleasure and in relationship with our feelings. Like, to me, that's where we actually then can embody this as a lifelong practice.
Yes, I see. Yeah, they don't. The basic program doesn't, because it comes from the place of like sex is the addiction, right? So you can't really do any pleasurable or sexual practice, at least for a certain amount of time. Yeah. So kind of like what I'm hearing is that getting your self-worth or getting your sense of value from external sources, especially like, romantically promising and maybe, caretaking and maybe like somehow like rescuing external, right, human sources is what, gets tweaked, right? Gets reprogrammed, hopefully.
Absolutely. I consistently hear the women, sometimes women know that they have that like seeking or sort of running in the background, but most of the time women are like, I don't know, maybe I think about men, or maybe, and then they're actually, when they step into the program, they really create their own container, their own guidelines, and why would I do this at all? And then at some point that I always hear like, oh my God, Kendra, I had no idea how much of my energy and attention was actually leaking out in this way towards other people, or towards seeking, or in the hopes of, or the, and these are successful women. These are high functioning women. These are women who are attractive, who have, have good relationships, but have these maybe chronic patterns. And then they're like, I had no idea how much of my life force was actually spent in this kind of, outward seeking space.
Right. Yeah.
And then it just gets to be, again, it's kind of like these cliche things that we know intellectually, like self-love or self-care, and it becomes actually embodied. I have women say all the time, like, oh, I actually think I know what people mean by self-love. And I don't know if I ever knew what that meant before.
Yeah. And I think integration, which is, also boundaries, integration is a big part of this because, we live, I think that, in patriarchy, I think that our culture is still patriarchy, even though, our laws and our medicine are not anymore, but our sense of meaning and our language and our patterns remain pretty much unchanged. So, I think that in patriarchy, we have this kind of like learned split, as you learn like language and identity and identification, you have like your sense of who you are, which is in your head based on who you're told you are, your name, your ancestry, what's expected from you, right? Your race identity, your national identity, your religious identity, and all that tribal. And that identity like doesn't really integrate with your body enough. And it gets further and further removed. So by the time we become sexual beings, right, like we get to our procreative years, we start puberty and our body changes, like we don't even really feel that that's us per se. So I think a relationship begins, which is like between, user and used, like our identity, our sense of self tends to use our physical being, which is really, the core of our being, but nevertheless tends to kind of like use and take advantage of our physical being and almost make it like a marionette, right? Or a puppet to gain things in life. And so it becomes harder and harder to really know what our body is saying or where we're at, because we're thinking, I'm using my body to get, not just, the attention from men, but approval in the world at large, often work, money, success. I mean, all kinds of stuff, right? So a lot of our living becomes performative. And it's hard to end it because that's now the pattern. It's so many patterns. Like I know it even in myself that if I leave my consciousness, I will catch myself doing like the, whatever when I'm interested in someone, I know that I'm going to begin to do this, whatever it is, girl thing or, self-objectification, I call it, but it's a performance. And how you get these parts to self-harmonize, right? To sync.
Yes.
To sync.
Yeah.
That's a big challenge.
Absolutely. It's a worthy challenge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a warrior challenge, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. What I love about what you said is the way you talked about it like an integration, or syncing up. Because so often what I hear is then people want to take like the body and have the body or intuition or inner wisdom, whatever we want to call this, our heart, and then we want that now to dominate the other part, the thought part, and I think that just creates another schism where we go, oh no, now it's the wisdom of our body is the most important. And it is, but where does our brain live? Like people will say all the time, they said, oh, I've got to get out of my head and into my body. And I'm like, I hope your head is part of your body. Because if it's not, we're like really in this is a whole other ball game.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is actually a big part of the work that I do is this idea, like what is it actually just to be whole, where we have our thoughts and we have our feelings and we have our emotions and we have our sensations and we have our consciousness and we have our spirit and we have our energetic, and it is just like you said, it's like, can they be just in communication and in sync with each other? Not a one part is better or should always be in charge, no matter what part that is.
Yeah. And we see that a lot, you know, I mean, again, you know, definitely not a criticism. So, but I see it, let's say, in myself, you know, the inconsistency, right? You know, when you have a moment and you're like, oh, you know, that was a hypocritical moment, you know, like, and it could be anything, but noticing that, you know, that's something that you say or think or judge, and especially desire. Desire. Is the last one.
Just sneak it in there.
I think the desire is the last one to get in. In sync. Mm-hmm.
Your laugh is so wonderful. I'm really like tickled.
I mean, this reminds me of like years ago. So I don't know if that's not an excuse, but I was younger. But you know, I made an appointment to have my breasts enhanced. And it's just, you know, and I put a down payment, right? So with a down payment now, I have already committed like $1,500 to it. So now it's not just, you know, I have invested in this. And everything that I believed in as a feminist, you know, as a thinker, but also as a natural, you know, natural person, a member of the natural community, you know, as a vegan, as a yogi, everything was telling me, what? Like, that was, you know, it was just you had a moment. It's okay, you know. And I tried to figure out, you know, I tried to just get to the bottom of what, you know, made me want to do this. And it was just like this raw, naked desire. It was, you know, it wasn't something that I could explain, you know, justify, right, intellectually or spiritually or morally, you know, or economically. For myself, you know, I mean, I wasn't a stripper or whatever. I couldn't come up with any justification, but I could tell that I just kind of like wanted that, you know, and I don't even know what the name is for that. I didn't do it. But I did kind of like get to take off all the, you know, a bunch of the veils and realize that the last one was just that kind of like, it felt like an instinctive desire, but it's not instinct. It's something epigenetic, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking and I just hear the words like, I just want it. I just want it. And it's interesting because I think there are maybe different kinds of desire, but that is some thread, right? Like, I just want it. And again, what I think is so beautiful about your story, and sometimes I see people can't really do this, right? They can't take off the veils and they'll make up justifications in order to not have to see like, I just want it. Or some other truths like, I mean, what I really see is most of the time, all of us have many, many things that are true at the same time. I believe in natural things. I believe other women's bodies are beautiful as they age. I don't like I don't like the way my breasts look, right? Like they might all be true at the same. I think I should, another truth could be, I think I should like the way my breasts look. And I don't. And I think, you know, like they're just sort of all true, and the capacity to not make any of them like the story of it true, but to tell the truth, like all of this actually is, if I just describe what's going on, this is all true happening inside me at the same time.
Yeah. But, we always have, eventually, again and again and again, we make choices. I mean, the no-man diet is a great example of that. That's, a huge choice. So we do make choices, and whatever that, super ego or super consciousness or greater consciousness or, is, whoever it is that makes those choices, has to pick one of these truths above the rest.
I would say that's true. It is true when we make a choice. And I actually think it's really important because people don't like limitation. So people like this idea, I always have all the options, right? And I'm not limited by it. I just want to be less and less limited. But it is true. We make a choice, and actually that does shift things. And it can create limitation, which I think is good. If we do it on purpose. But also, even in your story, there were all these steps. You had to think about it, and then you had to find a doctor, and then you had to make the first appointment, and then you had to put the down payment, and then you changed your mind, or you just made a different decision. You didn't go to the final
I didn't
appointment.
go. I just, until even that night, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, and I think
wake up
we
and
do
go.
make decisions.
Yeah.
And the truth is, you could have you could have then chosen a new doctor, or you could have, there are always choices.
Right.
And we do, or people choose the no-man diet, and we actually spend the first 3 weeks, each woman creating her own container. So rather than the idea that you step into the no-man diet and then I just tell you what to do. I teach about it, and I give some very strong encouragement, and I say, this is what I think works best. But each woman has to come to this is why I'm doing this. And so given the purpose for me, this is what is inside my container. This is what's outside my container. And this is what is gray area, or I don't know, this feels, and then to make decisions about gray area. Right. But then what that becomes, the way I like to think about it is if that's a fence line around, let's just say really cute baby lambs, right? You get little baby sheep, right? They're always woo. And the fence is partly to keep the baby sheep from wandering off, and it's partly to keep the coyotes from eating the sheep, and it's it's partly so the mamas can find the babies, and there's all these reasons for the fence. But the lambs are gonna jump around, and they're gonna woo, bounce into the fence. And it's not a problem if we hit the barrier of our container. We go, oh right, that's there for a reason, right? And it's another opportunity to choose back in. And like you said earlier, maybe they jump over the fence, and then we're oh shit, Now on the outside, it's just exhilarating, but also terrifying. And what have I done? And this, and then what is it? Oh, do we then run off and pretend I'm just going to pretend I was never within that container and freedom is better? Or do I want to on purpose jump back into the fence? Or do I need to ask for help because I can't jump that high? Or, there's so many choice points along the way.
Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. And the pleasure of self-control is also, it could also become extreme. I mean, anything can be done beyond
Absolutely.
balance. Yeah.
Yes, which again is one of the reasons I think community is so important, because most of us have a tendency to either overindulge or over restrict. And we go between the two. We over restrict until we hit, and then we're I deserve a treat. And then we indulge. rather than what you're talking about. Again, this like more conscious, like, okay, for an actual reason, on purpose, chosen consciously, I'm going to walk this path for a period of time to find out what happens. And to be aware of when we fall into over restriction or we want to fall into overindulgence, and go like, okay. And again, for a period of time. It's the same with food, right? I mean, some people go the rest of their lives without ever eating sugar again. But most of us, it's sort of like, oh, I would like, for a period of time, I would like to set aside, a subset of food just to feel what my body feels like if I set that aside just for a period of time. It's an experiment.
Yeah. So it's not so frightening or off-putting or like final.
Or rigid, right. Yeah, final. It's like, yeah, I mean, there are some things we should probably never touch again. If we, like, I don't know, heroin, we should, like, let's just never do heroin. But even candy canes, right? Like it's like it has a time. It's like, okay,
Yeah. But I think kind of like committing to things that we know are good for our balance, again and again, like by having done it a number of times, it's just, it makes it more normal. And that's just, such a silly word. Normal is like a statistical term, but statistically, it makes it more likely to do that again, Like with my breast story, as we're speaking, it's just occurring to me. I had fired my obstetrician, right? I had chosen to go to a doula and a midwife, right? And give birth in a jacuzzi. And I had chosen to breastfeed way over and above, like, the necessary minimum. And of course, it changed my breast forever, like what? And it was a shocking change, because it was like, wait, they were like young, and then they were like engorged, and then it's like, they're gone. Wait, so it was just like all happening. The change of the body was very like, where? Everything else was the same. But, I had only been breastfeeding from the breast. Like, I was not breastfeeding from the knee, or the knee would have had that change, right? But, like, we're not taught that. Like, we're not, it's not something that's just clear and obvious to us anymore, because we have these options.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And it's almost like where the options can kind of mess us up. Like, well, you could have the options to have your breasts again, rather than, what if, and this goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, what if right here we made like a prayer, or sort of a commitment, a devotion, and we're like, I'm going, even when I don't like my breasts, I'm going to like worship them. And through that, and I'm going to do this for every woman that I meet. Like, I'm now going to be the person that gives permission in the world. Maybe not out loud, depending on who the people are, right? But I'm going to be the person who's like, oh, actually, I worship what your breasts have done. And that I even worship the way they look, because it's a sign of your life. And so, no, I'm not only going to worship the little like 15-year-old cute perky. That I can worship that, and I can also worship my 44-year-old nursed 2 children. Like a little bit flatter. Like, because I worship actually every stage that the breast has.
Right.
And then like we said. Also, this is in some ways so specific, but you just generalize it out, right? Is like, then that becomes a choice, every time I see my breast, I have to make the choice again, right? Like I choose a devotion and am I going to embody it? Am I going to embody it today when I look in the mirror? And am I going to embody it when I take my shirt off for my lover? And am I going to embody it, okay, and how today?
That's it.
And it can, honestly, like I just start grinning when I think about this. Like sometimes people feel daunted because it's like, oh my God, like forever I got to do this. And I'm like, oh my God, forever we get to do this? Like,
yeah, well, if only we lived forever.
Yeah, I actually don't want to live forever, but I get to, I get to do this for, hopefully it is much longer. Let's say another 40 years.
Yeah.
Another 40 years to worship my breast.
Yeah. Well, for me, I definitely felt that, okay, I have to honor my previous choices. Otherwise I am undoing so much, kind of like, again, this is, I don't know the right word, but, so much agency and hard work. It would have been easier to do things, differently, more medically. And so, and that's partly what I mean by staying with like a conscious choice, motivates you to like try and make that same, conscious choice again, because it's not easy, so taking the leap to do this 2 weeks, it's not easy.
Yes. Well, and what I think is really beautiful about that is another thing that I hear from women, and it happens in other ways too, but certainly in the No Man Diet, is that sometimes it's the first time they've kept an agreement to themselves. And I think about how often, like, how do we want other people to show up for us, right? We would like them to keep their word to us, or we'd like them to renegotiate at the very least, like let us know. And how often we don't do that to ourselves. And then we have an excuse of like, oh, but I deserved it. Or I don't know. We just have all these justifications for why we don't keep our word to ourselves. And so it has multiple sides. One is, it is important to think about the decision, like the agreements we're going to make with ourselves, rather than just, oh, I should, right? I should make this agreement. I should do this, because then we have a hard time keeping it. But if we really take time and go, this is why, there's some wise part of me that says this is a valuable and important commitment to make to myself. And then what is it to show up for myself every day for 12 weeks and keep an agreement? And then be able to look at myself in the mirror and say, that's right. I keep my word to myself.
And then go out in the world, which is the challenge and the warrior. I mean, from my point of view, because like you're a Buddhist, but, I always used to say, well, how convenient for the Buddha that he had a wife and a palace.
Left all his kids up in a home, right? Well, of course I could meditate in a cave too,
I could go under the banyan tree. Who's taking care of all this other stuff?
I would love a little space to sit under the...
Who's cleaning up?
100%, yes.
So, doing this not in a monastery, but actually where you have to go out in the world and, get rest and receive like all the different energies and looks and, that's just much, it's much harder. And I think that therefore it's a stronger, like a more lasting lesson, and it tells us, I think that, if we succeed, and the more we succeed with challenges like this, we overcome this thought that, well, this is how I'm made. I was born this way, like to quote Lady Gaga, these excuses of like, well, this is how I've always been. And like, who's I?
Yes. No, it's very true. And I would say even the capacity to keep a to make an agreement with ourselves. I work with women in this and other containers as well, as like, What if you just commit to something for one lunar cycle? And what if it's the wrong practice? Who cares? Like, just make a different decision after that, right? But we get into this, like, is it right? Is it wrong? Who am I? Is this me? Is this not me? You know, and we're just like, oh, I think maybe I'll feel better if I drink 7 glasses of water a day. Okay, 1 lunar cycle. Just do it. And then at the end you go like, that sucked. I don't ever want to do that again. And you go, okay, great. Like, this is fine. You don't ever have to do it again. Or all the different things. You just go like, that's okay. But we can find out who actually is this being, if we're willing to just stick with something. And it doesn't really matter so much if it's like right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I mean, I tend to think like, natural and unnatural are better definitions, than right and wrong. But even so, like, do we really know what's natural? Like.
Totally.
We've been.
It's pretty complicated. Like,
yeah.
At this point, I think we can start to feel, but again, we often can't feel unless we're willing to stick with something. And I don't mean, if somebody's like hitting you, don't stay in an abusive relationship. Just like, well, I wonder if this is actually in line, right? There are extremes, but there's also this finding out what is actually in alignment. And like, I mean, you were talking about it with the body, but we all go through so many transformations in our lives that even, what was in alignment for me when I was 30 is different than what's in alignment. So to be curious enough about ourselves to go, I think maybe something, there's something important about like learning a musical instrument right now. Okay, I'll do that for a lunar cycle. And then I can be like, oh, that was the wrong instrument. But maybe now I'm guided more towards what is in alignment by having stuck with something long enough to find out, is it just hard? Do I just not wanna? Is it an instrument that's similar, but in a different variety, or like, but we can, and then we start to feel like aligned, right? What's actually in resonance with my being versus like natural, unnatural, right, wrong, good, bad, like, because what will resonate with your being and what will resonate with my being is probably slightly different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For me, I mean, especially as a writer, it's just fascinating how easy it is to put my body to know when my body is in alignment, right? Just,
yes.
I can have like a treatment, basically, someone's hands, and I just, whoa, I know it. It's so obvious. I'm in alignment, right? I stand differently. I feel I'm wide open. Everything's coursing, like all these energies are in perfect balance. It, it doesn't last, but you know it. But in mentally or intellectually, when words and meanings come in, with all of their biases, cultural biases, it's just so much harder to know, to just know that, I am in alignment with all that I am. Yeah. So when the consciousness, the conscious mind, comes in, I find it harder. What do you think?
I mean, my guess is that you've spent time cultivating the awareness of the alignment of your body. And so you have much more, like closer to the surface, or much more like immediately you're like, oh, I know that feeling. And maybe whether it's you or it's like other people, it's like, have we spent that time sort of practicing in ways that to feel, what's the hum of resonance, or so that when it's like something falls in, when I go, oh, like, yes, that has the hum. But the other thing that I would say is that, it often requires slowing down
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Everything.
And so like information comes in much faster at the more kind of intellectual or, verbal or image, like we often take in a lot of information very, very fast. And so then we're trying to ask our being to process faster, like faster than it wants to. But even one of those, just like, oh, let me take a moment. I'm not quite sure I understood. And then we have one full breath, and then we're like, oh, actually, I know I like this. I know I don't like this. I know I want to do this. I know I don't want to do this. Or I need to sleep on that. Like, I know I want to sleep on that. That's what we can feel. It's like aligned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean more on the thought process, or the intellectual level. So, for example, I understand what you're saying, kind of not going with your first response, for sure, meditating, like having meditation time daily, and not giving in to, not being triggered. I mean, all of that I understand, but that's more kind of like on the interpersonal, everyday level. But for example, what do I think about cryptocurrency? How do I know when actually my opinion about, crypto, or about reproductive rights, or about, RNA vaccines, or whatever it could be,
totally,
the war in Ukraine, right? Am I in a place of self-alignment when I have this, it's very much an intellectual process, and I find that part of us is, for me anyway, is more challenging to kind of like readily integrate, and be sure.
Yeah. I do have a couple thoughts. Can I tell you my thoughts? For me, the one part is that what you ended on, which is, and be sure. And so the willingness to not be sure helps me find, what I feel, but I don't have to know if it's correct or not correct. Like, exact. It's just, there's something around the sureness that helps to just be like, something around that. And again, for me, well, there's two things I would say. One is, when I'm confused, it usually means that there are some things that are like aligned and some things that aren't, or some things that I'm a yes and some things that I'm a no. And so if I can start to tease apart rather than this whole, right, like war in Ukraine is a great example. Like, that's like huge. Oh, well, I'm on no to war. And some of it I just don't know, but there might be these threads. Like, we can't say in our being sort of yes or no to something that big, because we know that there's threads that are complex. And then there's other things. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because I have nothing to back it up with, but there's things like crypto. I heard about, I was like, I don't like it. I just don't like it. And I have no data to back it up. And then I heard a podcast that gave all these good reasons. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad that someone else did that, because I'm never going to go like figure that all out. I don't even understand half the words they said. I just hear about something and I'm like, something about this, I don't like it. But I think sometimes we can get caught in, but I don't have any reason to feel that way. Mm-hmm. And other people I know and like feel differently, and they seem to know more than I do. So maybe I'm, and I was just like, I don't care. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're going to have listeners
That's
who are
great.
like, I was totally with her and now she doesn't like crypto. And I go, everything she said is bullshit.
Well, actually speaking of that, I did like record an episode on crypto early on, and I'm still ambivalent whether or not that was the right call. But it was maybe 2 years ago. So had I posted it, people might have made a lot of money off of it. It was this guy from Holland, and he had quit his job, actually from San Francisco, quit his job and just made money investing, daily in crypto. And so he kind of like analyzed how and why and all of that, right? And there is a contagious kind of like almost like prophesying evangelical element to it, right? Like a cult.
Totally. Yes.
I decided that I should not post it because I didn't want to be responsible for anyone like self-harming financially. Because of me. So I guess I had a similar instinct or feeling. I had my justification was I didn't want to promote something that I couldn't be sure about or felt clear about. But on the other hand, I have posted now like 2 or 3 episodes about the war in Ukraine, for instance, because I do feel that I'm a pacifist no matter what. And, this reminds me of, I took a workshop with Eckhart Tolle, I don't know, 20 years ago, right? It was the power of now, like when the book had just come out or something. So it was a long time ago. And it was a weekend. And I remember him saying that, we have to accept what is, and live in the now and not like project what we're going to do next and not kind of like decide according to what hasn't happened yet, right? Or predetermine our responses and whatnot. And so, of course, he's German. And, when he was taking questions, my question that came to me was, well, so if we were all like Jews, in Nazi Germany, we should then go to the camps willingly. That's basically what you're saying. And he did not give really an answer. He was like, oh, there are exceptions, not a real answer. But that is kind of like a central question for me since then. How do I like stand up for what I think matters in the world, and how do I, affect social change? If I don't know, if I can't somehow be sure enough, within the limitations of that assumption, that one way, is the right way, and it's worth fighting for and advocating for, and standing up for. So that's where like this kind of more cultural or intellectual based alignment, becomes necessary, is needed, and that's what I find harder to like confirm. Like with the body, it's so easy to confirm, and with and with heart and spirit, it's pretty easy too.
Yeah, I mean, I do think connected to what you're saying is like there's something about mind and ideas, and it's like malleable. It's more like air. It feels like, oh, I could be over here, or like smoke. It's more like smoke, I could be over here, like, oh no, wait, I'm over here, and I just changed shape. And so I know that there are people who can argue against like gun restrictions in the United States, and they have all the data to back them up. And they're making a really good case. And I think they're wrong. More from just like, again, it's more of like a gut. I'm just like, actually, I just know that if we had fewer guns, we would have fewer children die from guns. And I don't actually care what your like those numbers or these ways that you can use words. I know that they can be used any way. Mm-hmm. And so it's really tricky because I do think that our minds and our brains and our intellect mm-hmm. are so important, right? They are part of the body. They are part of the being. They are part of our human. And there is something about like, I also just know that you can say a word 3 different ways connected to 3 different images or something, you know, and suddenly they mean 3 different things and none of them are true. And so there is something tricky there that I don't have an answer to like exactly what you're saying, you know, but just that awareness of, I mean, I guess in some way it's the awareness of the limitations of different parts of ourselves. And it's like, I think that's one of the limitations of the mind, the intellect, the words, language. And I don't know. I mean, I love the inquiry, basically. Like, how do I do what's correct for me? How do I, you know, like in terms of social justice or social change or caring for humanity at a deeper level than just me getting what I want in life. And knowing that we can always be wrong. Yeah. Like I'm going to make this the best stand that I can make. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do my best to pay enough attention mm-hmm. that if it really seems like I'm wrong, that mm-hmm. I can change my stance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we do live in a time, in an era where I think it's extremely obvious how, you know, like words can be used for, you know, opposite purposes. You know, you know, we lived through like 2 administrations, basically. For example, you know, in politics, it's very obvious, you know, like, Tucker Carlson and Dr. Cornel West like will say the same things, but you know they may want to enact that in different ways, but they can use the exact same points and arguments. So it is something that we can, like what you're saying, the quality of air, it feels very accurate and true, and we. And being conscious of that, I think, is useful and helpful. Yeah. You can hear my dog. She's 16. I apologize.
She's like, it's time to go out. It's time to go out.
No, there is no rhyme or reason. I think she's just imagining something. She like spends, you know, months not making a sound, and then she has this moment. So I apologize. Another thing that I wanted to hear you speak on is the difference between dualities, polarities, and pluralities, which I find, you know, really fascinating and useful. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it also, again, this just sort of having an awareness, I think is so valuable, and being willing to just ask the question, right? Like, is this a polarity or is there a plurality? And there are things, I mean, we can just say like light and dark but there's things that I think we've made into, we talk about them like they're polarities. That I'm like, I don't know that sun and moon are actually, they're just different. Mm-hmm. So I think also there is this way that human beings like maybe have a desire to polarize, like, or there's some inclination towards polarizing, and to be able to kind of like hold that there are things and go like, yes, these are, but I had a teacher say to me one time too, I was talking about masculine, feminine. And I was like, I don't know, I was having some sort of, but this and but that. And he looked at me and he was like, Kendra, it's the same fucking magnet. Like he was sort of like, at what point does the negative turn into, like there actually is a positive end and there is a negative end, and it will have certain impact on reality because of that. But at some point it's the same magnet. So just being able to be aware of again, the multiple truths in that. And, but then something like sun and moon, can we just be curious enough to go like, what is the energy of sun? Like, what does it feel like? And what's my response? And what is the energy of moon? And they don't have to be polarities to just be curious about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then we have things like, mycelium, right? Like the, and I'm like, that's just plurality, right? Like this is another element of the world and life is something that is wildly of plurality and interconnected nature, that is also true.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful, that's beautiful. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We're all a magnet.
And I teach sometimes
all the opposites. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I mean, I teach sometimes in the realm of like masculine, feminine, or these things, because there's a value there. But I think what's challenging for me is I do think that sometimes it makes people sloppy, and they'll just say things like, well, I just want him to be more masculine. And I'm like, okay, if I said that, it would mean something different than if you said that, which means something different than if she says that, or if he says that. And so what are you actually wanting? What is the feeling? Like, what is it you want this person to do with their feet, or with their breath, or with their eyes, or with their spine, or with their consciousness, or with their mind? Like, what do you actually want to have happen that you're just kind of getting lazy and calling be more masculine? Mm-hmm. Or to ourselves, right? We get lazy. Like, I just wish I could be more feminine. Like, well, why? Like, what? Why? Yeah. And then there's something in there. Oh, would you like to be more receptive in your heart, right? Oh, there's probably real value in that. So it's not that there's not actually value in the specificity. It's that we sort of gloss over that.
Yeah. 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 And that's why you're saying, slow down to allow time for all of these details.
Yeah. And I think it's vulnerable. It's more vulnerable to say like, oh, would you hold my gaze and breathe into your belly, than it is to say, I need you to be more masculine. It's like, oh, there's something I actually am wanting. And so it's more vulnerable in the space of human connection as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And vulnerable is powerful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. As it turns out.
As it turns out.
Yeah. 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 Well, thank you, Kendra. This was, magical. You're a wise woman.
Oh, thank you. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah, for me too. A pleasure and an honor. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing with us. And everyone out there, this is Kendra Cunov. I'm Eve Eurydice. And until next week, keep speaking sex. If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.